Okay, everyone, welcome to episode 11 of the Pyramid Pod. With me today, I'm really happy to have Ebonee Davis. Why don't you start by just giving a little introduction about yourself?
Okay, my name is Ebonee Davis. I'm a model. I'm an actor. Some people call me an activist. Personally, I don't identify with that label. I'm just someone who believes in the radical, transformative power of self-love. And so that's what I like to teach. That's the message I carry with me, and that's what I would like to be an embodiment of.
Yeah, that's one thing that has always kind of drawn me to your message in particular is your views on activism.
Mhm.
And I think I saw you say at one point that like the greatest activism is to become like the embodiment of the type of person that you want to to see on earth.
Yes.
And I'd really love for you to elaborate more on kind of what you mean by that. And yeah.
Absolutely. I think the protests and riots last summer are a great place to start with this. The George Floyd and Breonna Taylor riots and protests. There was a lot of people in the street. There was a lot of people asking for freedom. There was a lot of people making demands. And I think what we don't realize generally is that freedom doesn't come from an external source. It comes from within. It comes from the embodiment of particular frequency. It comes from loving ourselves. What does that actually look like? You know, it looks like rest. It looks like self-care. It looks like sometimes baths. Sometimes it's a little bit more rigorous. You know, the healing process can be very rigorous when you're facing your shadow and you have a lot of behavior that needs to be confronted and so that it can be alchemized and changed. But the point is essentially that it's not something that's given to you. It's something that's within. You were born free. And it's from the outside that you were told that you were not free. But once you embody the frequency of freedom, that's when you can actually step into it, own it.
Yeah, I really like that. And for me, there's something in there where like if you're asking the government for freedom, then at some level you're acknowledging that the government has power to take away your freedom,
Right.
right? You're
Yes.
acknowledging their authority over you.
Yes.
And and yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. And and yeah, I think there's something so powerful about like activism in its truest form, which is
Mhm.
like it comes from the desire to reform and to make positive change in the world.
Yeah.
And it's really just like something been confronted with a lot in my journey is how to how to be a positive like channel of that change
Right.
without stepping outside of my power, just kind of like doing like yeah, like not because here's another thing that I've noticed in activism is that sometimes like you can build your ego around a cause to the
Right.
point where like you're not necessarily even being a constructive part of change. You're just kind of
Right.
oh yeah, I don't know if kind of
No, I totally understand. There's so much like martyrdom that goes on in activism where people feel like they have to sacrifice themselves for the cause. People feel like they have to put their bodies on the line for the cause and they feel like that's noble. That's not noble to me. That's actually narcissism. It's a form of narcissism. It's ego. You know, I think the most noble thing that you can do is embody your own freedom and then allow the embodiment of your freedom to then overflow, allow your light to guide other people to their light. Um, like you said, people can center their entire identities around, you know, the cause. And in a way I have another tweet that's like, you know, people identify so closely with their trauma that they don't know who they are outside of it. And that unknown can be frightening. A lot of people are afraid to actually do the work for themselves. Also, you know, this is something that I had to come to realize about myself was that I've always been a very sympathetic, empathetic person. And I thought that sacrificing myself meant that I was doing the right thing, doing the good thing, doing the righteous thing, doing the godly thing. And I had to realize that actually serving myself and pouring into myself, and then allowing the overflow of pouring into myself to then serve my community is the right thing. Having boundaries is the right thing. Focusing on my own healing is the right thing. There's nothing truly noble when it comes to activism and spirituality about martyrdom and self-sacrifice. It really comes from typically like a lack of boundaries, which comes from childhood trauma. So in a way, you know, you're just playing out the dramas of your childhood on a larger scale, and you know, projecting all of this anger and rage and things that you probably have toward your parents on a larger scale.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I also remember at one point seeing you tweet another thing about activism, kind of along this vein of thought. That was like, if you're struggling to find your purpose, your like what your activism should be driven by, is to look at who you are and then to fight for every square inch of that person to exist freely in this world.
Yes.
And I think a really important part of that tweet, which I really like, is like, before you can do that, you have to know who you are.
Yes.
You know, you can't really stand up for yourself until you know who you are. And I think that's really where all of the greatest activists, instruments of change have began their journey.
Yeah. And, you know, the knowing yourself comes from the healing, right? And the healing is the stripping away of the layers that you've taken on to defend yourself and protect yourself and make yourself palatable, make yourself fit into your community, into your family, into organizations, into religions. It's removing those things. It's, you know, removing the blockages and the behaviors due to certain trauma and certain experiences, and really getting to know you. So being an activist essentially is it first has to be getting to know yourself. It first has to be your own healing process. For me, I remember you know, first started getting this title activist when I decided to wear my hair natural. When I first decided to like start wearing my hair in an afro, I used to straighten my hair. I've been in the fashion industry for 10 years. And when I first started in the fashion industry, it was very much like cookie cutter uniform. Everybody has to have the same style, especially as a Black girl. There was very rigid expectations around the way that I should show up in that space. And so, you know, I was forced to conform because that was my dream. And I feel like it's very much part of my path to have that experience, and then to come into the experience of then breaking out of that and deciding, okay, I want to begin wearing my hair natural because I'm tired of showing up to set and sitting in a chair and, you know, feeling bad about what is mine, what was given to me by God, you know, feeling bad about my natural features. You know, I'm tired of feeling that way. I'm tired of people not having the education to style my hair or do my makeup, and then projecting that onto me and making it seem like it's my fault. And so I began to wear my hair natural, but that was sort of the tipping point into this self exploration. And I was like, you know, if for so many years I believed that I had to conform in this certain way, and I believed that I wasn't beautiful unless my hair was straightened, and that part of it goes back to childhood. You know, I think the fashion industry reinforced it, but I've been hearing that same belief about straightening your hair, wearing your hair a certain way since childhood. And so if, you know, I had this deep-seated belief that if I didn't have my hair straightened, then, you know, I wasn't beautiful. And I was like, okay, so what other beliefs are running me internally, subconsciously informing my decision making, not allowing me to be myself? And it just began this whole self exploration that, you know, it went from hair to childhood trauma to relationship experiences and relationship trauma, and just really identifying everything that had taken root inside of me that truly did not belong to me and did not align with my belief system and the highest idea of who I am, you know, my highest self, all of these things that I had taken on just through experience. So that's really my activism has always been just advocating for this person that I'm becoming as I strip away these layers and, remove these beliefs. It's never been about, oh, I want to go out and
Yeah.
change the constructs of society, even though, I believe through healing, the constructs dismantle, because the physical constructs are a projection of our psychological constructs. And once we heal our minds, heal our bodies, and heal our nervous systems, then physically there is no energy to uphold the physical constructs. So to me, the activism is really in the healing and really in the reprogramming of our minds.
Yeah, yeah. And so would you say that like part of your journey is like you want to kind of break through a lot of constructs in the beauty industry and the fashion industry and kind of serve as an inspiration for other people to feel beautiful as they are at like.
I think that was definitely my goal at one point, and I think I've achieved that. Like now, if you look through a magazine, you'll probably mostly see natural hair. I can't take all the credit for that, but I know that in the industry, I've been very outspoken and I've put a lot of effort and a lot of heart and a lot of soul into making tangible, visible, real, sustainable changes. And I think the results of that are present, which is really, really cool to see. And I think now I've sort of moved past just the fashion industry, even as like a public figure. Like I'm also an actor, I'm also a poet. I have a whole catalog of different forms of self-expression that I like to, dive into at different moments. But now the message I think is bigger than beauty. I think it's really about rest and healing, rest as restoration, rest as radical, rest as revolution. I've gotten to this point in my own life where, kind of like what we talked about in the beginning, like martyrdom, there's no nobility in martyrdom. The real resistance is actually taking care of our bodies, particularly as, the descendant of enslaved people. My ancestors never got the chance to rest. My ancestors never got the chance to sit down. My ancestors never got the chance to take baths with rose petals. And you know what I mean? There's just so many things that I can do for and I don't even want to say that my ancestors never got the chance to do that. I want to say that my ancestors didn't get the chance to do that in the last 400 years, because that's what they were doing before that 400-year period. So I'm really just revisiting, my ancestors prior to enslavement and honoring them as well, by maintaining this level of self-care that they practiced. And, they're alive inside of me. I recently went and heard this wonderful lady by the name of Queen Afua speak. She's a very well-known healer, and she said, your body is your altar. And I thought that was so profound. It's like when we dress ourselves, when we moisturize our skin, when we put on perfume, when we put on earrings and decorate ourselves, like we are honoring our ancestors. The altar doesn't have to be a table in the corner of your house or your apartment. Like, consider your body an altar and allow what you put on your body and what you put in your body to be an offering to your ancestors.
Yes. Yeah, I really agree. And I also kind of like, I see people as art,
Yeah.
like I see us as expressions of art. And I think that is another thing that's I've always kind of been drawn to your page and like your message is you are clearly so much more than just a model. You use all these different avenues of SoundCloud and you create music and you do poetry and it's like you're basically just a vessel for creative expression. And I
Yeah.
think that's so powerful. And I think that's really like the blueprint of human divinity is we are creators, and to
Yeah.
be in touch with that is so inspiring.
It is. I feel like you know, I'm getting emotional thinking about it, but I feel like we're just here to tell God thank you, like in every way that we can, you know. Um, I want to make music to tell God thank you. I want to write poetry to tell God thank you. I want to create images to tell God thank you. Um, you know, anything that I do, like I'm here to express the divinity that is channeled through me, and to give thanks to it, and to use it to be of service to other people, to also inspire them to get into a place of gratitude so that they can also recognize the divine and recognize the magic in their lives, and be inspired by it. And I think that's, quarantine, I think, allowed me to really break outside of the model identity. Like I had done a lot of stuff prior to that I think, um, had already made my identity a lot larger than just a model. But being in quarantine really allowed me to sit with my own just self without anybody sort of pulling at me energetically or demanding anything from me. And it really was just a period of cultivation, and um I felt so close to the divine in that moment, because I was by myself. I was completely by myself. I was deep in my self-care. I was juicing, I was resting, I was meditating, because I was literally in an apartment by myself for 8 months. And I think it really just showed me the potential that we all have as human beings to be, um, multidimensional creators, and have many, many avenues of expression. And I think in this society, we're taught that we have to, jack of many trades, master of none. Like, we have to sort of pick one thing and stick to it and get good at it. And that's all we do for the rest of our lives. And I think that, we may have things that we're more passionate about, that we naturally gravitate to more and put more time and energy into. But I think we all have the capacity to, express ourselves in many, many ways.
Yeah, I really resonate with all of that. And I think for me in my journey as a creative, that um that pigeonholing of like you're supposed to develop one skill set and then just stick with that for like the remainder of your life, and like that is like who you are and your purpose on earth, like
Yeah.
that was what really turned me off of the corporate world. Like I
Mhm.
went to college for mechanical engineering, and I loved like creating, and I've always liked science and math as well. So I kind of thought engineering would be an avenue for me to express myself creatively and innovate.
Mhm.
And then the longer I went through my education, I just felt like I was being, yeah, pigeonholed into 4 or 5 professions, that I could almost see the next 10 years laid out in front of me. And it was like, it was spiritually draining, just like even thinking about it. So
Mhm.
I kind of realized like I can't lose touch with the creative in me. Like if I
Yeah.
lose touch with that, like I won't feel like myself anymore. And I have to
Yeah.
do whatever I can to maintain that. And yeah, I also, another thing I really like, that I think you embody is the end of the starving artist trope. The idea that as a creative, that you have to accept some like poor quality of life, or you have to accept that you're going to be sleepless and hungry, and you're not going to be able to indulge in self-care. And like that's another thing that I really wanted to break out of, is like I want to be a creative. I want to, yeah, work with different artists and design clothes and create pyramids and all this. But I also want to, yeah, to live a beautiful life with luxuries and no shame or guilt in any of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think like two things come to mind, and the first is that I think we are gradually moving to a place in society where we actually have respect for artists. And I think that will continue. I think in the past, like generally there hasn't really been a high regard for artists. And so there hasn't really been a place for us because everything has been so business centric. And you know, you, like you said, you go to school, you pick a career, you do that for, you know, 50 years, you retire. But I think we're really really shifting away from that, and I think that COVID and quarantine definitely was a huge part of the catalyst that's going to shift us toward that. And I also think you know, redefining our idea of luxury is another like major shift in consciousness that's going to make the artist experience more enjoyable. Because you know, of course there shouldn't be any, you know, shame around like taking care of our bodies and taking care of ourselves and, you know, eating well and things like that, but that hasn't been the common narrative around what luxury is in the past. You know, I don't, my idea of luxury isn't going out and buying, you know, super expensive things. And I might like every once in a while, you know, I like nice things. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But truly, my idea of luxury is being able to um, take, you know, eat good food that's good for my body, and take care of myself well. And so I think those are two things that, you know, we're shifting into culturally that haven't necessarily been um, at the forefront of our idea of success, and what we should be aiming for as artists.
Yeah. And I like in the that college experience, like when I was kind of making these decisions, I really agree with what you're saying about redefining luxury. Because like when I was in college, for example, I was fortunate enough that my grandparents helped pay through my college, so I didn't have a bunch of stress on me in those years. But I had like $1,500 basically to pay for rent and food and any activities or save up for concerts, whatever. And so for 4 years, like I lived off the $1,500 a month. And I don't know if that seems like a lot or a little, but I realized like I was so happy, that it was so much, it was all I needed. And so then I started to redefine my concept of success to be more around freedom, and more around like living life on my own terms. Like that to me is priceless, having control over when I wake up, what I do every day, like these things started to seem like the true measure of success, and my energy is my currency, my time is my
Yeah,
currency.
absolutely. I think there's a natural abundance that occurs when you are in alignment with your truth. You don't need as much physical wealth because wealth shows up in other ways that sort of alleviate the burden of having to shell out a bunch of cash. You know, you might become a part of a community that grows its own food, and so you don't need to necessarily go to the grocery store. You might meet someone who makes clothes, and so you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money on designer things. You know, you have this way of attracting things that meet your needs, and so the material demand in terms of cash just isn't as great. And it comes from being in alignment. It comes from, like you said, your energy being your currency.
Yeah. And I want to go back to something you said like a few minutes ago, saying that COVID was like a catalyst,
Mhm.
which I really agree with. And then also tying it back into what you just said about communities. Like, I'm curious to see, like, or to hear from you what you see in your visions of the future, and where we're headed, and whether this whole quarantine situation, COVID situation can be some type of blessing in disguise, and how we can use it to bring the power kind of back to individual sovereignty in communities.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, I think this whole pandemic and the way that it was dealt with by the government sort of lifted the veil on the fact that the people we have put in power, the people we have given our power away to, um, they really don't care about us. Like if it needed to be more obvious, then like now I think is the time to like have a radically honest conversation with yourself about the fact that like these people we've put in charge don't deserve that authority over our lives. We deserve sovereignty over our lives. And I think that COVID was a catalyst in the sense that like it gave us the opportunity to awaken if that's what we chose. It gave us the opportunity to see what was really going on if we chose that. And some people chose to be like, I'm becoming skeptical like of these greater powers and these greater forces that have all this say so in my life, but clearly don't really care. And I think some people got even more mystified and went deeper into sleep, deeper under the spell, out of fear. And I don't judge anybody on either side. Everybody's path is their own. I feel so fortunate to be awakened in this lifetime, but that didn't necessarily have to be my path. But I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that I can assist other people in getting there. um, but yeah, I feel like COVID is definitely a catalyst for me. Like I said, personally, it was just a period of like self cultivation where I didn't have the demands of work and, people pulling at my energy and needing to fly here and needing to be there. And I could really sit with myself and get even more authentic in who I am because there was no outside influence. Um, and as far as community goes, I feel like the future, once we step out of this governing body that we're in, this democracy that we're in, and recognize that our sovereignty is the most important, powerful thing on this earth, we will begin to live in communities, self-governing communities, where because each of us are living in our purpose, we don't need for much because it's so interesting that once you align with who you are authentically, you're naturally of service, you're naturally of benefit to the world. You're like a tree that provides shade and, gives fruit. And it's like a tree isn't trying to do that. That's just what it does authentically. That's just its code. That's just its blueprint. And so humans are very much the same way. When we follow our true code, our true blueprint, and align with nature, we're of service. So then we can go into community, each of us contributing something, and live sovereignly. We don't need police. We don't need government. We don't need legislators and people making these big laws. Once you gain your sovereignty through healing, you become self-contained in such a way and respectful of energy in such a way that you just don't need some outside force telling you what to do, how to behave. You're already self-aware enough to do that on your own.
Yeah, it's a similar perspective to what I see happening right now. And I also see COVID as kind of this really interesting, like almost like a timeline split where I agree, like on one end, like the endless fear, I think, does put some people deeper into sleep and deeper into putting the government like more in authority of everything, and I think that, like, at one level, that's the intention behind um yeah, a lot of not just COVID, but a lot of situations like this, where you stimulate fear because as an authority, the more fear there is, the more power you can grab
Yeah.
from other people.
Hmm.
Um, but then I also see the blessing on the other side of like I know so many people who decided to change their path, who quit their jobs and bought
Yeah.
a bought a van, built out a van, is gonna road trip around the country or whatever, just like and this is another thing that I want to do in my journey is like I want to remind people that there's so many ways to live, and so many creative ways to live as a sovereign being, and for me right now, it looks like road tripping up and down the West Coast, selling pyramids at a booth when I need some money. And like, it's like people forget that there's so many other ways to do it, because from such a young age through the school system and also just like parental pressure, like a lot of times you've already canceled out so many of your dreams because
Mhm.
you think there's only one path that you have to walk.
Right.
You've been envisioning yourself getting that corporate job, climbing that ladder for so long that it's kind of hard to deprogram that idea from yourself. But even just with like the working from home now as an option, like I think a lot of people are using that as a transition and realizing, wow, I like being more in charge of my schedule, And so even if they're working a job for a corporation and sometimes they're passionate about it still, but it's like I still see some more individual freedom and people kind of like coming to terms with liking yeah, being more in charge of their own lives, more self-governing, which yeah, is really I just think it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out because I don't know how like at what point like are we going to address the governing structures, and is there going to be some aha moment where we realize like the people that you idolize, these political parties, these these figures, they're not really people of integrity that you should like you don't need to look up to them, they're just another group of people that have their own flaws, have their own healing that they need to go through, and it doesn't mean you need to be hateful and light buildings on fire to prove that that there's flaws in the government. But
Mhm.
at a certain point, like I think people really do need to kind of snap out of it and be like, wow, like we really are out here and this really is a situation that we are being governed by people that really don't have the integrity to use the power we've given them for the greater good of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if there's going to be some huge moment of awakening. Like you said, I definitely feel like there is a timeline split. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple years, because I think that the lifestyles of folks who are on the awakened path and folks who are still deeply asleep is going to be so radically different.
Mm.
Already there's so much division that's happening. And so, yeah, it's just going to be very interesting to see how it plays out over the next couple of years. But what I do know is that in this moment, this earth that we are on is in support of this awakening. And so I think for those who are asleep and remain asleep and will remain asleep, life is not going to get any easier because the earth needs us to awaken too. We've done so much damage to the earth through exploitation, um, through genocide. through in my industry just being a very filthy industry in terms of pollution and production and waste. Fast fashion is killing the planet. And so this living being that we are on wants revolution. This living being that we are on wants to raise the consciousness. And so for those who are not willing to awaken, I know that life on this living being is not going to be great.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's another thing that we could probably agree on, is I think sometimes in the environmentalist movement, for example, like I've noticed for me a disconnect from the earth itself, because like when I go backpacking or spend like immerse myself in nature and really try to like connect with Gaia, like for me I get this clarity that it's like we are not like some massive threat to the planet, like we are definitely being destructive, and we are harming other species, and we are polluting the oceans and the ozone, and like we are like a lot of our behavior is like somewhat parasitic to the earth.
Yeah.
but but like the earth, this living being that we're on, like she can flood us at any point,
Right.
she can shake and she can cause earthquakes and she can do whatever she wants. And I feel like that's part of I don't know, that's part of how I interpret some of the natural disasters, is like
Yeah.
earth communicating to us that we need to, yeah, like be more in harmony with her. We have to live
Exactly.
in harmony with um mother nature. And yeah, that's I guess where I also see the revolution in terms of like where I draw the line of like where I stand is like nature will prevail through
Yeah.
this. Like I understand like nature's intelligence
Mhm.
more than I understand man-made laws and governing structures. And for me that is all somewhat illusionary and can crumble and is not, um yeah, isn't that like solid of a ground to stand on, especially in these really chaotic times. Whereas like the innate intelligence of the earth communicating to us, like that is very, I guess I trust that.
I agree. I mean, that's what it is to know yourself, right? We talked about that a lot in the beginning, like knowing yourself as a means of revolution. And to know yourself is to know that you are a part of nature. You're not separate from nature. Your body came from the food that you got from the tree. Your body, when it dies, is going to go back into the earth, and it's going to go into the worms, which are going to go into the birds, which are going to, you know what I mean? Like we are very much a part of this thing. And so that same intelligence that's out there is within us too, but we've allowed that to be sort of overlooked and pushed to the side in favor of these man-made laws that have only been around a couple hundred years, whereas the laws of nature have been around forever and will prevail. And I absolutely agree with you in terms of the fact that, like, in the sort of like dialogue around climate change and things like that, there's like this, save the planet thing. And it's like, actually, the planet's going to be okay. Like, save humanity, like, save yourself. Don't, and I think that's where the disconnect is, in terms of people who don't care about the earth, is like they don't realize that, like, we are a part of this thing. And so when you destroy that, when you pollute that, you're polluting this. um, but it's like how you do one thing is how you do everything, right? If you're littering and dumping and polluting, you're probably not eating great. You're probably not taking care of yourself. You're probably not treating your body well with very much integrity either, And so we have to learn to heal and to love ourselves and to, take care of ourselves and realize, like, again, this is a symbiosis. This is, we are part of this thing. But yeah, I said something on Twitter the other day that was like, after the Hurricane Ida, I was like, this isn't climate change, this is climate rebellion. You
Mm,
know, the earth is alive and she will destroy you before she allows you to destroy it.
yeah,
She's rebelling. This isn't just, you know, climate change. It's not like we, you know, humans are so arrogant. It's not like we just affect the earth and the earth doesn't affect us back.
yeah.
I think that's what we have to realize.
I agree, um, and that's honestly like these concepts of living in harmony with nature, like that to me is it goes back to my childhood. Um, like I grew up just camping with my mom and my grandma like every other weekend and going. I was raised in Utah, so we'd go to Montana and Wyoming, and I just always like really had a reverence for nature. And so when I got into engineering, like one of the ideas behind it was I was like, I'm gonna develop this next level of technology or some innovation that's gonna allow us to live in harmony with the earth. And once I do, like everyone will immediately adopt the technology and everything will like fix itself. And um, then at that same point when I started really questioning the the governing structures of my education and really everything, I realized like a lot of the technology and a lot of the things that we need in my mind to develop a higher civilization, it already exists. Like we've already developed a lot of these yeah, these and it's just a different way of living. But I came to realize like there's an active effort from the current paradigm to suppress and resist like the next paradigm, and I guess that makes sense because they're preserving their own power, whether it's the fast food industry or the oil industry or whatever it is, like this this paradigm of like self-destructiveness, which I agree is like it parallels with fast food and oil. Like you think they're not related, like they don't
Mhm.
seem related, but they are because one is you polluting your inner world and the other is you polluting your outer world. And if you're okay with one, you're probably okay with the other. And yeah, that's when I really took a turn in my activist journey of going from thinking like, oh, we just need to like develop this technology and everyone is on the same page that this is what we need, to realizing like we need fundamental change to the building blocks of society. We need to completely reimagine whether we need government or what kind of governance is healthy and allows for individual sovereignty. And I guess that's a great transition for another question that I really wanted to ask you here is just like what your perspective on sovereignty is, how you define it, how you embody it, and how you think we can inspire more of it in the world.
Yeah. Um, Sovereignty is really, you know, it's me governing myself. It's me saying that, you know, waking up at 5 a.m. works for me, and then going and doing an activity from 5 to 7 works for me. And then, you know, taking a nap from 12 to 5 works for me. Like, you know, maybe not literally, but it's self-determination. It's determining for myself what is my blueprint, what is my pattern, what works best for me to be in alignment and to be a vessel for expression of the divine, you know. And that doesn't necessarily look like 3 meals a day for everyone. That doesn't necessarily look like not working 9 to 5 and sleeping 9 to 5 for everyone. Those are all constructs of the society that we live in that we don't often question. Who told us that that was the way that things should be, you know? And so it's really deprogramming all of this software, really deprogramming all of this software, viruses, right, that are in our psyche, that are being projected out into the world through our collective consciousness on an individual level, deprogramming it. Because it, like you said, for example, if you eat fast food, whatever, eat McDonald's, you're probably gonna not care about polluting the world. But once you start treating yourself differently, it influences the external world. And so sovereignty is deciding what works for you, what makes you most aligned, and in integrity with yourself. And we just moved into the age of Aquarius, and that's what the age of Aquarius is all about. Age of Aquarius is all about the weirdo, the freak, the individual. We're moving out of the age of Cancer. Age of Cancer was about the collective, the whole group think, everybody sort of doing the same thing. And, you know, maybe that was a paradigm that we needed at that time. But now, at this place in our Earth's evolution, that paradigm is expired. It's no longer of benefit to ourselves and to nature and to the planet. Now, the most beneficial thing that you can do is claim your sovereignty, claim your individuality, be unafraid to be different, be unapologetically yourself, and realize that you being yourself is the benefit to the collective versus you trying to conform to the collective.
Yeah, because like by being yourself, I think you create space for other people to be themselves, you know, by like being unapologetically who you are. and and I think healthy boundaries is a big part of that too, you know, of really knowing yourself and your routine. And if you need a nap from 2 to 5 and that really like works for you and your creative process, like being able to stand in that and communicate that to other people, like I think it actually inspires other people to feel comfortable living differently themselves and
Yeah.
exploring yeah, exploring their truth and trying to discover what works for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I have another question for you that kind of ties back to seeing yourself as nature. Like, do you feel like part of the COVID agenda is to further disconnect people from nature? Like in terms of whether it's staying indoors or wearing a mask all the time and over sanitizing everything, being afraid of germs. Do you feel like there's some aspect of what's happening with the pandemic that either intentionally or unintentionally is, yeah, is disconnecting people from nature and more into technology?
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if that, like you said, I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but I definitely do think it's a very real byproduct of what's happening. I also think it's disconnecting us from nature in a less literal way, but in a very real way, in terms of like our collective shadow, right? And our individual shadow. Like there's sort of this, thing around purity that's happening, that's like, you know, it's going beyond just maintaining cleanliness and maintaining good hygiene habits, and it's into this like who can be the most pure, like who can, you know, double mask and double sanitize. And I don't know how you feel about the vaccine, but even despite whatever side you're on, you know, there's just so much like, well, I'm Pfizer and I'm this and I've had 2 vaccines, and you know what I mean? There's like this thing around purity, and it's like removing us further from nature in terms of the fact that we are in denial of like our shadow, you
Yeah.
know, of our, I think it's in the same way that Christianity and religion has done it. You know what I mean? Where it's like, the more that I can move away from that part of myself, the closer I am to God. Whereas in nature and in reality, the more of that darkness that I can integrate, then the more light I can embody. So I think on a subconscious level, there's this division happening that is very similar to the division that has been caused by religion, where it's becoming a hierarchy based on purity, this false sense of purity, um, which I think is driving people further into unconsciousness.
Yeah, I
'Cause,
think,
it's in religion and with COVID, it's driven by fear, right? The race toward purity is all comes from a very fearful place.
and like, and I almost see the race towards purity also as the race towards technology, of like almost, because yeah, I mean, I've used my platform to talk about the vaccine here and there, and essentially, like, I haven't personally taken it, and I definitely believe people have the right to make their own decisions about it, and that the passports and stuff is like a real infringement on our personal sovereignty. But in the bigger picture, what I see happening is like in society, like in the grander scale, we've really glorified technology, where like so much even of our human interaction is through technology at some point. And the kids that are growing up right now are addicted to their screens. And we are, in so many ways, we've started to act like artificial intelligence is more divine than organic intelligence, natural intelligence. And I think you can even say that there's some aspect of that in the vaccine, of like believing that, like, whether you want to take it or not, whether you trust the pharmaceuticals and the scientists that develop it, like, it's really not my place to make any comments in there. But ultimately, what it is like, at some level, you don't believe your natural immune system is doing enough, and you want a like repeated booster shot to continue upping your immune system so that you can be protected.
Right.
And for me, it's like it's almost it's almost like, eh, I don't know how to quite say this, but it's almost to me like a gateway into a level of transhumanism, where
Mm.
if you suddenly need constant, like, upkeep, if you start like, and they even model it, like, you recently said something about our software systems, like they're even marketing the vaccine as an update to your software, and and for me, like, I do just think in terms of what you're saying, the race towards purity, it's like a race away from mud and dirt and the and germs, when really, like, you are a community of living organisms, and you're made up of germs and bacteria. And it's almost like being in like having disdain for yourself as an organic creature when you're so antibacterial and so afraid of wearing a mask outside, and just, I don't know, I see it on some level as a rejection of nature and the belief that only technology can save us.
I absolutely agree. And I think, again, it's very parallel to what religion has done, right? It creates this disdain for who we are naturally, this disdain for the shadow. But in denying the shadow, we're denying the creativity. We're denying the fact that we are sexual creatures, and, that energy, if we are able to harness it and directly direct it correctly, we can manifest amazing things. There's it's just a shame and a guilt that's created around who we are naturally, created around the darkness, created around the mud, the germs, everything that isn't deemed pure and light. And we've also seen it play out in race, right? We've seen the physical manifestation of that, where it's like Black is thug and criminal and all of these sort of negative things, and then whiteness is purity and righteousness and being upright and being an upstanding member of society. So we see this idea play out in many, many different ways throughout our culture. But yes, I think in this moment it is playing out in the medical and technological field, and it's very interesting to witness. Yeah, it's just very interesting to witness because, like you said, we are an organic technology, right? We have the intelligence of the universe within us. And so to deny that in exchange for an external thing is to deny God, to deny that you are a part of something that is beyond any intelligence that a human can comprehend. Um, and it's to deny your power, right? Because if you're constantly depending on a source outside of you to keep you healthy, then you are at the will of whatever that source is. What if, one day it was like, okay, no more, no more, no more shots, no more vaccines. Then you're going to go crazy because you feel like you need this thing, right? It's this thing that you've developed a dependency for, that you believe is keeping you safe. And now that you've denied yourself of all your innate power, all your innate intelligence, you believe that you need this thing outside of you to feel whole and to feel safe.
Yeah, yeah, that's um, very aligned with kind of just how I've experienced this whole, last couple years, and kind of my thoughts on what I really perceive as medical tyranny, where it's hard to even, and that's why I appreciate this conversation, is it's hard to even discuss it, because I think there's some like non-productive conversation on both sides of the argument, or it shouldn't even necessarily be an argument, but it's just, for me, the solution to finding peace again is back to what we're saying of sovereignty,
Yes.
um, and respecting, like, that if you do want to partake in the vaccine, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to shame you for your decisions. I'm not going to, try to judge you for that, but I think most of what you're seeing is in the other direction, of people that get the vaccine and then they feel self-righteous. They feel like, because I got this um, double shot or triple shot now, whatever it's at, like, because I did that, I am being a good human, because that's what you see in the news. You see it's your societal duty to do this, and also to tell your friends and family to do this. And if you don't, like, then you're dangerous. And if you have anyone in your life that is questioning it, they're dangerous, and it's the start of a very, um, I would say, just like tyrannical rhetoric, and like, in terms of what we're saying, of to see how the next few years plays out, like, that's something I'm keeping a really close eye on, because I'm never gonna get it. So what does life look like for me? What am I gonna be able to travel? Is that a sacrifice I'm gonna have to make? Am I going to be able to go to live concerts? Are are musicians gonna make a stand and
Mhm.
say, I don't want to play to a crowd that is forced with mandatory vaccinations, or whatever it is? Like, I'm just curious what the next evolution of human society is, and whether these passports are really going to be the breaking point in the timelines of like people that really are like, okay, well now it's time to get into communities, you know, because that's really like in my vision that I have for the future I see with myself. It is in some type of community where, um, yeah, and going back another, I think one of my favorite things that you've said this podcast was just that by being your authentic self, you are naturally in service. Like, not trying to do anything, not trying to save anyone, but by being your natural self, like you are bringing your gifts to the world and to your tribe, your community. And I think, like, going back historically to, like, I think who we are is at some level we're tribal beings. You know, we seek like a feeling of belonging inside a community, and yeah, that's where I see. I'm not sure how it's going to happen, but I eventually that's where I see this going. Is I see society getting so draconian and dystopian that it just really is like the fear timeline, you know, of a dystopian 1984 novel versus an organic rebirth of civilization through awakened humans connecting and building communities together and contributing their gifts.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I don't know how the two timelines will, coexist and what that overlap is going to look like or what that division is going to look like. But I already feel like the split has occurred. I feel like I've withdrawn energetically from the system. And, I think I was really already doing that prior to COVID. And now I'm very, very much like, after having 8 months of not being able to travel, not being able to model, not being able to work in the way that I had been working for the last 10 years, um, I really began to see just how sustainable I could live on my own and be on my own, and how I really uh, didn't necessarily need to participate in that at all in order to sustain myself or to be who I am, to have the identity that I have. And so I think, just continuing to withdraw my energy and put it toward building this new timeline versus, participating in that, and knowing subconsciously or consciously that like very soon none of that will matter. Like, Fashion Week in New York is happening right now. I'm in LA because I just, why continue to participate in that at this time when I know that energetically those things are obsolete. They've collapsed. They're gone energetically, in the same way that our government is gone. We don't have a president right now energetically. Like physically we have a president, but there is no governing body in place right now. We are completely sovereign right now.
Yeah.
And we can claim that right now energetically, and eventually it will manifest in the physical once enough people have aligned to that frequency in their psyche. But I truly feel like Trump was the last president, and as disruptive as he was, it was a necessary disruption. Yeah. Right? Because again, just like COVID, it woke people up. We pierced the veil. We saw how much of a circus act this system is. Having a reality TV show star as the president, supposedly the most powerful person in the world. The president of the United States is a reality TV show star. If that didn't wake you up, like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what will, And so I feel like Trump was our last president. And from there, that's when the timeline split began, was back in 2016.
Yeah.
And I think it's really, really splitting now, but it started then.
Yeah.
And I'm glad Hillary didn't win the presidential election back in 2016, because it would have just been more of the same. We would have just continued to be in this spell, in this sleep.
Okay.
So again, I recognize the privilege that I have in being able to say that, I wasn't directly affected. Like, my family wasn't ripped apart during the Trump administration. You know what I mean? My family wasn't deported. My family wasn't put in cages. Like, there are some very real, tangible things that happened during that Trump administration that were atrocious. But I know that on an energetic level, that level of disruption was necessary to begin this global awakening.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I also I view Trump as the last president. And one thing that was kind of like crazy for me is there's actually a book that I read like a few years ago called The Last President. I don't know if you've seen this, but
Mm-mm.
it's literally a book that was written in like 1894,
Oh,
and it's
wow.
called The Last President, and it name drops Trump. It specifically says the name Trump and Pence, and
Wow.
it literally was like prophetic about like it even he's even in the book like has a big tower in New York. Like it's eerie the foresight of the author, and his last name is my last name. Like the author of the book, his name is Ingersoll Lockwood,
Oh, wow.
and my name is Braden Lockwood. So I remember like reading that book and then looking into my own ancestry and realizing that this actually was an ancestor of mine down the line.
Wow.
And yeah, so I agree that energetically Trump really was our last president, and we're now in some type of I almost see as like the transition period into a new world. The last thing I think I want to just loop back to the very start of our podcast is what you said about like withdrawing your energy.
Mhm.
Like that to me is the most revolutionary act, because I also know you wrote one of your favorite poems. One of my favorite poems of yours was Reactivist,
Mhm.
which you're basically talking about how there's a lot of well-meaning people, whatever, that whatever shows up in the news, like that's their new activism, and they're just reacting to whatever shows up, and there's no like discipline or spiritual or a lack of spiritual guidance in that process. And I really have started to see like the most revolutionary thing you can do is to, on one side of things, completely remove your energy from feeding these systems, even by reacting to them, even if like even when I really want to react to them, like I'm trying to just really like starve them of my energy while creating in the new paradigm,
Yes.
and trusting in that, that whatever I'm being guided to create is a piece in a bigger puzzle that other people are also creating.
Yes. Absolutely. I think um, I had a tweet a while ago that was like, everything we create and consume can't be in reaction to these current constructs, that can't be in reaction to patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy. We have to create with integrity. We have to create from our soul. We have to create with spirit. And when we create in the new paradigm, we create bridges that allow people to transcend their current state and move closer toward a state of integrity within themselves. But when we create in the old paradigm for the old paradigm against the old paradigm, we don't realize that we're actually feeding it. You
Yeah.
know, we're draining ourselves trying to slay this beast when our castle is over there, like the kingdom is over
Yeah.
there. Go be a part of the kingdom. Like the beast is going to slay itself. The beast really, like we said earlier, like Trump was the last president. The beast is dead, like on an energetic level. It's just like you said, we're in this transition period where we're waiting for it to play out and unravel in the physical. And so while we're waiting for it to unravel in the physical, we just have a duty to continue awakening folks so that they can join this collective consciousness and we can all harmonize on this frequency together, while you know where we're envisioning this new world so that we can magnetize that to us, and what's in the past will crumble on its own, because what's in the past is only sustained by our focus, it's only sustained by our energy, it's only sustained by our attention. So when we move that elsewhere, it's starved. You know, it's starved of the things that it needs to continue to be. Therefore, it will perish.
Yeah. I really like that. Especially you said even when you create against the system, you're still feeding the system. You're
Yes,
providing like because just the fact that you're creating against the system means on some level you're
your
creating in the
intention.
same paradigm
Exactly.
as the
You're on the same frequency. You're creating on the same frequency as the problem, or what you see as the problem.
yeah.
When you're creating against it, you're creating on the same paradigm, in the same frequency. You have to create above it, you know, and magnetize that.
And yeah, it reminds me, I forget the exact quote, but I think it's like some ancient Greek philosopher. I want to say it's Socrates. He said something along the lines of the secret to change um, isn't focusing your energy on the on like even like changing the system that already exists, but in developing new systems that basically make the old systems obsolete.
Exactly.
You know, like really creating new, um, yeah, building in a new paradigm uh, energetically. And I also really like what you said about like serving as bridges
Yeah.
for consciousness, because that's something that I really agree with in terms of service and duty and activism is like working on yourself and discovering yourself and pulling off layers of yourself. Like you're doing it for you on one level, you know, um, but you're also serving the collective, because by stripping off those layers you are basically becoming a channel for other people to do the same thing. You know, you're providing other people with a window into the inner work that they can do to transform themselves.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, yeah, I don't think I have too much for you today, but
Awesome.
thank you so much for making the time and coming on. And I really enjoyed this podcast.
Cool. Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, of course. I'll have you back on at some point.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Have an awesome
All
day.
right. Take care.